This is the Left in the Forgotten Borough podcast. I'm Andrew Savage, and my co-host Nancy Richards is back from her cruise, but she's feeling a little bit under the weather. We'll see her later in the week. But for right now, I am joined by a very special guest, Manhattan Democratic Party District Leader, Kim Moscaritolo. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So we have a long and very rich history here on Staten Island. I was president of the Young Democrats of Staten Island for a time. I believe you were president of the Manhattan Young Democrats around the same time, weren't you?
Yes, in 2012, I was the
Yes,
president.
that was my year as well.
That's right.
And even before that, what I really always remember you for is you stood with us, the Young Democrats of Staten Island, when we were holding up our little lapel pins, our rainbow lapel pins in the rain, along Forest Avenue, right down here. And as they tried to forcibly remove us for uh, showing support for the LGBTQ plus community, and you got it all on tape. You were the one who got it all on tape, and we finally have an inclusive parade, which we had just had a couple of weeks ago. And I was thinking of you as we reached that milestone.
Oh, that's so nice. Yeah, I remember that very well, maybe fondly isn't the right word because it was a a pretty crazy day with everything that they put you all through. But I was just glad that I was there to sort of document the whole thing and glad that it got the coverage it deserved. And it took way too long after that to officially make the parade inclusive, but I'm glad that it finally happened.
Yeah, it is. It's we finally got there one way or another. The last parade has to be on the planet to do it. Um, But the reason why you're here is because on the Left in the Forgotten Borough podcast, we have been bringing people on who know Andrew Cuomo best. We talked to Ross Barkan, who wrote the book famously on Andrew Cuomo. We talked to Janos Martin, who was a former member of the Moreland Commission. And I saw recently that you were on an ad campaign with other women, basically urging New Yorkers to say hell no to Andrew Cuomo. And so tell us a little bit about that. First of all, how did that all come to be, and why did you decide to be a part of it?
It came together very quickly. Actually, somebody I know through local political activism actually sent an email that included a link that was asking, women who were opposed to Andrew Cuomo to film a short video. They had sort of a sample script. They wanted you to stick pretty closely to the script, but of course you could say it in your own words and talk about why you were opposed to Andrew Cuomo. So when I saw that, it was in the evening. I think I'd already had one or two glasses of wine with my husband, but they said that they were pretty sure he was going to announce the next day.
You need that
And
wine. You need that wine.
well, right.
You need that
So,
wine.
well, so they said that they were going to announce that he was probably going to announce early the next day. And so they wanted all the videos in by 6 a.m. I am not an early riser, so I said if I'm going to do this, it's got to be tonight. So after having my couple of glasses of wine, I said, okay, I'm gonna film this video, and I did. I, shot it a couple times just on my cell phone and uploaded it to a folder. And I actually wasn't completely sure what they were going to do with it. I wasn't directly in contact with the organizers, but I trusted the people who'd sent me the link, so I knew that, it would be fine. And then, sure enough, the next day, he had announced, and it was all over social media. It was on Blue Sky, it was on Twitter, and they used my portion of the video. So it was pretty exciting. I was very proud of that. There were a lot of other really terrific women who were in the video as well. And I think it made a really important point. So, yeah, it all came together very quickly. I can't really take any credit. I wasn't one of the people who put it together. I just sort of, recorded my video and sent it in, but I was really proud to be a part of it.
Yeah, well, when I saw the ad online, and I was going through it now, of course I agree with the message, but I was like, when I saw you, I almost stood up and cheered. I was
Oh,
I was
that's so nice.
Yeah, and uh So what has been the feedback for from that video and from the message of that video? Because what I'm reading is just poll after poll after poll has him at the top, as though, people have amnesia and they don't, remember what it was like having him in power for 12 years. But
Mhm.
what has been the response?
Well, for me personally, I mean, it's been really nice to hear from folks who just happened to see the video on their social media feeds and recognized me. That was really nice. In terms of the reaction, officially to the video, as I said, I wasn't one of the main organizers, but what I can say is that I've been sort of pleasantly surprised, even among folks I see on social media, that a decent amount of people who, quite honestly, I wasn't sure where they would fall on the spectrum in terms of supporting Cuomo, have been pretty vocally opposed to him. There were some really interesting articles. I think there was an op-ed in the New York Post about Andrew Cuomo. He hasn't been covered super positively in either the Post or the Daily News, which has been interesting to me because I feel like those are two publications, especially the Post, that I would have assumed would have been far more pro
Oh
Cuomo,
yeah, oh,
and the
yeah.
fact that they haven't been was a pleasant surprise to me. I mean, they're probably supporting Curtis Lewa, so
Yeah.
that's a whole other issue. But I think in terms of the polling, I like to remind people that at around this time in 2021, Andrew Yang was leading in the polls with about 30% back in 2021. And, it was a different time. Obviously, we're still sort of coming out of COVID and everything was kind of still remote. But I think it's a cautionary tale because I think, early on, especially when there are so many candidates, I think name recognition plays a pretty big role in the polling results. Obviously, a lot of people know Andrew Cuomo. They certainly know the Cuomo name. A lot of people remember his dad. So I think the name is just very well known. It is true, he, I think, enjoys a certain base of support, particularly in areas where Eric Adams might have had support. And I think that's what he's counting on, that he'll be able to peel away some of that support from the mayor. But my hope is that this campaign that has sort of now begun in earnest, the Hell No Cuomo campaign, but also, there's a pretty big campaign that's
Dream,
focused, Dream
dream. Yeah.
exactly, focused on, right, it's don't rank
Eric or
Andrew,
Andrew.
Eric or Andrew for mayor. That's right. Don't
Yeah.
rank Eric or Andrew for mayor. So, I think between those campaigns, my hope is that, you know, now that he's officially a candidate, I feel like people will start putting his actual record out there and reminding folks of, everything that's out there. Yes, of course, it's the accusations of sexual harassment, but there were so many other things. And, even before COVID, there were so many,
Oh,
you
take your
know,
pick. I mean, like take your pick, honestly.
well, right. I mean, I was sort of, refreshing my memory a little bit. I was looking back and remembering as far back, I call myself a sort of an OG Cuomo critic because I remember as far back as 2012 when I was president of the Manhattan Young Democrats. I remember his role in the redistricting of New York. At that time, he was the governor. We had a Democratic assembly, but the state Senate was Republican. And Cuomo liked it that way. He liked any situation that gave him power. And he had power when there was a divided legislature. And so I was part of a group that was making this really big push for an independent redistricting commission.
I
You know,
remember.
the
I remember.
it was, I mean, it was a big deal back then. And I remember, a lot of people saying, and it was true, that if we could get fair redistricting, we could have a chance at a Democratic Senate because we're a pretty Democratic state. And Andrew Cuomo, along with his pals in the assembly at the time, did everything in their power to not make that happen. And somehow that year, the Democrats still won a majority. But then, well, I could go on and on. That takes us to the IDC, which is a whole other
IDC.
ball of wax, which we could still
Yeah.
talk about. But
Oh,
anyway,
yeah, we covered that when Ross was on, and
yeah.
my state senator at the time was part of it, and I remember a very contentious Jody's meeting that you came to about that.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah. And so, as we talked about, there's a million different reasons to say, fuck this guy. Why are we doing this? But for mine was when he was really going hard after teachers, particularly teachers represented by the United Federation of Teachers, which is, of course, my union, and his just absolute sellout to big money charter school interests, pushing evaluations, a punitive evaluation system down our throat, making me work with a pension that I have to be half dead to enjoy. And so, what compelled you to speak out about this particular issue involving women and the allegations against Cuomo? As we've been saying, I mean, take your pick. There's a whole menu of things to say, fuck this guy over.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the allegations and they're very credible allegations. I mean, I want to be clear here. It's not just the Attorney General and her independent investigation that, found these allegations to be very credible. The Justice Department, the US Justice Department also did an investigation and found that there was a pattern of harassment. He harassed 13 women in his years as governor. And that's incredibly serious. We are living in a time where we have a president who is a sexual abuser. We, we are in this time where people who have done really horrible things feel like it is their right somehow to be able to come back into public life and, hold these positions that I think are, you know, positions that do require you to have, some level of character and and
Yeah,
and some level of morale. I would like to
you
think.
asked too much. You asked too
I
much.
know.
You knew.
It's just, especially now with everything going on at the federal level, it just seems to me the notion, the notion that this is literally the best New York City could do would be to put a sexual harasser back into one of the most important positions in the entire country. Yeah, it's mayor, but the mayor of New York is an incredibly powerful position. It's one of the largest cities in the entire country. Our budget as a city is larger than budgets of many states throughout the nation. So, New York City mayor is a pretty important position. And it's crazy to me that as Democrats, we would think that the only person who could do that job is somebody like Andrew Cuomo. I just find it absolutely disgusting. And I think you're right. I think a lot of people have forgotten, they remember the daily press conferences during COVID, and that's sort of the image in their head.
I,
I think it's
my mother fucking just, I mean, loved him for that. And I said, this is
yeah,
a horrible human being. And he's,
yeah, but I think that's on, part of this is it's on us, I think, to remind people, I think people do have short memories these days. And there's so much going on. I get it. There's just a million things happening in the world and in the country. But I do think that we have a responsibility to really remind people of the kind of person he is, because I don't think that's the kind of person who we want leading us at this time.
yeah. And what I've heard, and we'll get to the Staten Island Democrats later, Jesus Christ. But uh, what I've heard essentially from the people who are supporting him here is, well, he's an asshole, but he's our asshole, and he'll use it for
Mhm.
our benefit, and that doesn't usually work out too well. Um, when I was looking at the video and what you all said, and then I read somewhere, I don't remember what it was, that the Working Families Party was associated with it somewhere. Is that true?
Yeah, I believe so. I don't know that they're the only organizers, but I do believe that people within the Working Families Party were part of the group that was putting this together.
Yeah, and which is interesting because Cuomo has a really acrimonious history with the Working Families Party. He's
Mhm.
attempted to push them off the ballot. He created a phony women's equality party to try and delegitimize them and to make them irrelevant and to basically toss them off the stage somehow. And I'm wondering, like, if you have any insight into the Working Families Party's deliberations, or not deliberations, but like that sounds like, smoke-filled rooms, but um, just what they're thinking now about this potential return.
Yeah, in full disclosure, I mean, I'm not a member of the Working Families Party, so certainly can't speak to what kind of conversations they're having internally. But as you said, there is a real history there. I mean, I remember 2014 when the Working Families Party was considering very strongly not giving Andrew Cuomo their line. And it was a big controversy. It went all the way to their, annual convention, and there was a question of whether or not he was going to get it. They ultimately gave it to him. But even after they gave it to him, he was still so angry that they almost didn't give it to him. That, like you said, he immediately created the Women's Equality Party, the
Mhm.
WEP, which was clearly an effort on his part to pull votes away from the WFP and their ballot line to hopefully deny them a ballot line in the next election. But that is the kind of person he is. So, I have to imagine the folks in the WFP now have long memories and certainly remember what he did all those years ago. But I also think, the current leadership of the WFP, I would imagine, has very strong feelings about, as I said, allowing somebody with these really serious, very credible allegations of sexual harassment um, to be in any position of leadership, that has to play a role here. And not just that, but his history of corruption. I mean, there are so many other allegations. There's still pending allegations that he used state resources in writing his book after the pandemic. There's just all sorts of accusations and really credible accusations that I think the WFP, like any other, progressive movement, is very wary of having somebody like that in a position of power.
Yeah, yeah. And getting back to the comparison with Donald Trump and Andrew Cuomo, another thing that I've heard, defenders of his say is, well, he'll stand up to Donald Trump. I'm like, really? Will he? I don't know. And
He
I've,
hasn't so far. I mean,
yeah.
he has said nothing as a candidate or before becoming a candidate, to my knowledge. He has not come out forcefully against anything that Donald Trump has been doing. So I don't know why people would say
Well, again, he's an asshole. He's just our asshole, and so
that.
he'll use it as he'll
Mhm,
use it as a way to endear people and to be, a champion of us downtrodden folk.
mhm,
But he is the Staten Island Democratic Party. Uh, although I should say just the leadership committee, not
mhm,
the entire county committee, because I have a feeling the people in the leadership of the county committee knew that the people in that room would have the similar reactions to you and I.
mhm,
And so they just, this is before he even got in the race. They put out a statement saying, "We call on him to enter the race as though he's going to ride in on his white knight of, whatever, and
mhm.
save us all." Um, and then what I've noticed also is just that Democrats in the city council, in state assembly, state senators, um, he's been just unfurling these endorsements day after day after day on his social media. And so is this the lesson that Democrats are taking from 2024? We just have to find our own prick and then just line up behind him no matter what we do, what they do.
It's incredibly frustrating as a Democratic district leader. Look, I will say he has been rolling out some endorsements, but not a lot. If for being fair, he had the supposed list of district leaders. When he rolled out his list, there were three, I think, from Manhattan. We have 76 district leaders. So it was a tiny percentage. If you roll them all out and list everybody, it looks like a big list. But when you think about the number of Democratic officials in the city, it's actually a pretty small list in terms of the elected officials. I know Camilla Hanks on Staten Island endorsed him. I know he's gotten a few other endorsements, but again, not that many. Um, and look, I think relationships here are a part of it. I think there are some elected officials who either go back with him or maybe even go back as far as, remembering his dad. And so part of me wonders if that's playing a role here. But I think also, look, let's be honest, there are some folks in elected office who want to back a perceived winner, right? Because they think down the road, if they do that and he wins, they will get something out of it, whether it's some kind of favor or, additional funding for some program that's important to them or more money for their district. I can't say for sure that this is what is motivating these folks. Obviously, that's just my
Oh no, I've heard it.
interpretation.
I've heard it. I've heard it.
But my point is that, elected officials sometimes are motivated by these things. And so even if in their mind he's not necessarily, now look, some of them may just very genuinely feel like you said, like, well, this is the guy who's going to do it. This is the guy who can stand up to Trump. Yeah, he's a bully. Yeah, he's a jerk, but he's going to be on our side. I don't actually agree. I actually feel like on many Democratic issues, he is not our champion at all. At least if he were actually championing important issues, like you said, like, focusing on labor rights or women's rights or any of these things, you at least could make that argument. But it's not even like he's been that great on so many of these issues. On a lot of these issues, he's had to be dragged there, kind of kicking and screaming. So I don't even really understand that argument. So look, at the end of the day, these folks are going to do what they're going to do. My hope is that enough people in this city wake up to the reality of having Andrew Cuomo as a mayor, and that ultimately those endorsements don't mean much, because I just think he would be absolutely terrible for the city.
Yeah, and I've heard from people here, well, on Staten Island, it takes so little to humor us. It's just so, they're like, oh, well, he knows we are, essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, but he says, oh, they basically, well, he knows we exist and the others don't.
Mm,
So, and I was like, well, have you asked them?
right.
Have you invited them to forums, or when you decided to do this fucking endorsement, did you ask people to come and speak and earn the endorsement? No, of course you didn't.
Well, that's what's frustrating too, right? It's, this notion that I think when you hear, oh, well, the Democratic Party of Staten Island has done this endorsement, you assume, well, there must have been a process, right? And clearly if they didn't actually hear from all the candidates, at least they considered all of the candidates. And then you realize, no, this was, near as I can tell, it was likely just a few people in leadership who decided this is what they were going to do and got enough people on board to do it and put out the endorsement. Not that there was any real process, because as you said, it wasn't like they brought all of the district leaders or the county committee members together to do this. So, it's unfortunate that that ends up being representative, supposedly, of the Democratic Party in the borough, because it is certainly not representative of all of the Democrats there, not of you, not of other people I know who live in the borough. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah, yeah. And one person I've heard a lot about as somebody who could potentially be the anti-Cuomo vote is Speaker Adrienne Adams of City Council. Now, I don't know much about her, but I did watch her State of the City last week, and I was like, she was impressive. I thought it was an impressive address. But what's the calculus about how to defeat him and how to defeat Adams? I know people are saying don't rank Eric or Andrew, but is there talk of maybe some slates running and having that be the strategy? What's the sense that you get of that?
It's a great question, because we do have ranked choice voting here in New York. Right. So I think as a first step, obviously not ranking either of them is incredibly important if we don't want either of them to ultimately be our mayor. Similar to you, I do not know that much about Adrienne Adams, if I'm being honest. I think that's probably how a lot of people feel. She, by all accounts, has done her job as speaker very ably, and people seem to like her a lot. But, I'm curious if folks will have enough time to really get to know her and understand what she is about and, what she supports. I don't know what her constituencies are. I don't know, where she would necessarily pull votes from the others. But what I have heard is that she would be a good person to rank to be a block against Adams or Cuomo. And I think that's fair. I think the key is going to be ranking, obviously, ranking all five and ranking five people who are not Andrew Cuomo or Eric Adams. And then perhaps, deciding one strategy that I've heard put out there is to whoever you think could potentially be the last person standing against a Cuomo or an Adams, ranking them fifth. So for example, even if you didn't know that much about Adrienne Adams, or maybe you weren't in agreement with her on every issue, if the thought is that she could do well and could potentially be one of the last few candidates standing, it might make sense to rank her fifth in order to potentially block any of those votes going to either Adams or to Cuomo. Um, Not to say that you should only rank her fifth, but just that it might make sense to rank somebody who you think has a very good shot as one of your lower ranks. But ultimately, I think, I've said for a long time, and this is just my personal feeling, I think people are going to have to coalesce around one or two candidates. I don't know that it's enough to just say vote no on either of these two people or don't rank these two people because, you know, ranked choice voting is an interesting thing. And a lot of folks, I think, tried to do that in 2021 to block Adams. I know I certainly did. I ranked five people, none of whom were Eric Adams. But
Same.
ultimately,
Yeah.
yeah, but ultimately, I think it's not enough to just vote against people. I do think people want to be able to vote for something. And so I know a few groups have already, suggested these are the three people. I believe it was UAW. I could be wrong, but I believe they put out a top three. Their three were Brad Lander, Jessica Ramos, and I want to say Zora Mamdani. I could be wrong about that, but I know they ranked three people. I know that other groups have done similar things where they've said these are our top two or our top three, and you should rank them. We don't care what order you rank them in, but make them your top three. So I think groups will start doing that. I'm hopeful that as we get closer to the election, if it becomes clear that there is one candidate who is doing the best against those two, that people might hopefully coalesce around that candidate. It's sometimes hard to do that. Candidates don't really like to drop out. People want to hedge their bets sometimes, but I'm just hoping that we can get to a point where that's something we do because I think we're going to have to do that if we have a chance of beating them.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh and I think also maybe, people aren't saying this, but it's just a gut feeling I have. I think people are, a little bit scared of the progressive stances that a lot of the others are taking, given how well Donald Trump did in New York City in 2024. He didn't win any except for us, of course. But he
Right.
didn't he didn't win any of the other boroughs, but he significantly improved his performance. And in the state overall, I mean, Kamala Harris only won by 12 points. And what I've heard people like Melissa Murray say, the professor from NYU, law professor, she just says, people aren't that big into Trumpism, but they don't like disorder, having to go to CVS and wait a million years for somebody to open the thing and get the deodorant and do all of that because of the rise in shoplifting and things like that. And so, like, what do we say to people who maybe think Andrew Cuomo is kind of a bulwark against these other people who may seem a little too far left?
So I would say a couple of things to that. Number one, I think it's really important that we, particularly as Democrats, don't buy into some of the propaganda that is out there. I don't mean to say that, look, people are concerned, people have been concerned pretty much ever since the pandemic. There's no question that coming out of the pandemic, we saw a rise in crime and that is real and people's experiences are real. And I don't want to discount that. But I also think that there is both in our local media and in national media, as well as among the GOP, there is this real effort to convince people that New York City is some sort of hellhole, right? That it's, Mad Max style roving biker gangs that are, wreaking havoc. And again, I don't want to discount anyone's, you know, personal feelings, but that's not the New York City that I see. And I think running a campaign that is focused on how much New York City sucks is not a winning campaign. You know, I moved to the city over 20 years ago. I love this city. I know so many people who love this city. You know, we love the arts, we love the diversity, we love the excitement of this city, we love the kind of lifestyle that you can live here. I think a lot of people love that about New York. And I would like to think that the key to winning here is not about convincing people how terrible it is, but about reminding people what a great city it is. You know, I feel like we want our mayor to be a real booster for New York City. Are there problems that should be addressed? Yes, of course. Homelessness is out of control, and that's something that absolutely needs to be addressed. We need to address the high cost of housing. You know, there are many issues that need to be addressed, but I don't think that you get there by consistently telling people that New York is a crime-ridden, terrible place to live. So I think we just need to focus on the positive things about New York, about reminding people why they love living here, and you know, going with optimism rather than going with the sort of defeatist pessimism that I feel like, you know, the New York Post is sort of constantly trying to sell us.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I would also, you know, and the other thing I would say is the notion that Andrew Cuomo is going to be some sort of law and order governor, given his many legal problems, given his corruption problems, given all of the women who have come forward about how he has treated them. I think I I think the notion that he is going to be some sort of, you know, law and order mayor is is something that we have to dispel in people's minds, because clearly following the law is not something that is important to Andrew Cuomo.
No, it's not. And actually a lot of these, I'm all for an equitable justice system. I don't think that people should be held indefinitely without bail, that kind of thing. But I do think a lot of the reforms from Albany over the last few years have been kind of short-sighted. They haven't really taken into account the impact on the ground. Which Andrew Cuomo signed those bail reforms into law. He signed those discovery reforms into law, and now he's saying that Democrats have to, take a look at why conditions are deteriorating. Look in the fucking mirror, dude. I mean,
Well, but this, I mean, this sort of goes to the point, you know, I don't, and I don't know that anybody truly knows what Andrew Cuomo stands for, except for Andrew Cuomo.
yeah,
Because the fact of the matter is, he, I don't know that he has any core beliefs. It is,
he
you
doesn't.
know,
It's
right, when he, you know, when he supports something, it's because it's politically popular or because he thinks it makes sense for him to do so. As I said, you know, with lots of these things that Democrats care about, he had to be dragged there kicking and screaming by activists and by people in his own party in the state legislature. So, you know, the notion that he is going to stand up for people because he says so right now, he's saying that because he thinks that's the thing that's going to get him elected, but nothing in his past indicates that it's anything that he particularly cares about. And if the political winds suddenly changed, I guarantee you Andrew Cuomo would change with them.
Oh, absolutely. He has no beliefs at all. He's transactional. He is always what's in it for him, and it prizes personal loyalty above everything else. Gee, where have we heard that before? I don't know.
Hmm.
So getting back to like the campaign of how we stop him, I
Mhm.
remember, another city council speaker who ran and didn't make it was Christine Quinn.
Mhm.
And part of the reason why Christine Quinn didn't make it is because there was a really effective anti-Quinn campaign. Just anybody but Quinn hounding her on the negative stuff, all that. And ultimately it worked. Like, is there talk of that for Andrew Cuomo?
It's a good question. I mean, I feel like in some ways we're already starting to see that with the, you know, the Dream campaign that we talked about, with the Hell No Cuomo campaign. I mean, there is very clearly an effort to remind voters of all of these terrible things about Andrew Cuomo that people, you know, may have forgotten over the years. Um, it with the Christine Quinn thing, I mean, I certainly remember that era very well. it's a little more complicated. I think when you talk about politics, you can't discount the impact of gender. She was a gay woman,
Mhm.
um, would have been our first woman mayor. I personally did not support her in that race, but I don't think you can discount the effect of that. So I think that played a role, but I think had we not had the anybody but Quinn movement underlying it, I don't know that it would have been as effective. So I think that played a big role ultimately in her, inability to win the mayoral race. Interestingly, that was the last race that we had prior to ranked choice voting. So it was a much different thing, right? You just had to clear 40%. And if you could clear 40%, you could move on. And even if you didn't, then, we would have this runoff vote. And it was very different from a strategic perspective. It was very different. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, the sort of anybody but Eric or Andrew sort of phenomenon in a situation with ranked choice voting where people can rank multiple people. Is it as effective as it was in 2013 when we didn't have the ranked choice voting and people could only vote for one person? I don't know. That's yet to be seen. In 2021, I think there were some people who were against Eric Adams, but I don't think it was nearly as it wasn't as pronounced, and it wasn't there wasn't a clear campaign against him, even though there were some folks who didn't want him. So we've never really seen this play out before in the ranked choice voting world. So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out.
Moving ahead to the general election, I mean, a nightmare scenario that I've heard of is that Eric Adams switches parties
Mm,
as a Republican. And then if, this guy wins the Democratic primary, you have two really awful people running against each other. I've voted for the socialist in the last three mayoral elections because the choices have just been so awful. And I voted for the socialist last time. I can't even tell you her name. I couldn't pick her out in a crowd of one, but I was not going to give my vote to Eric Adams, and I was proven right. Uh,
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard that too. I feel like that's not, especially now. I mean, look, we're in the middle of petitioning at this point. So truthfully, if it were going to happen, I feel like it probably would have had to happen already. Obviously, Curtis Sliwa is, currently getting signatures to be the Republican nominee. I'm not sure if there are others. Um, there is a guy named Jim Walden who I believe is trying to run as an independent.
yes.
So that'll be interesting. You know, I don't, as much as Democrats don't like Eric Adams, I think Republicans really don't like Eric Adams, even with all of the Trump stuff. So I have a hard time seeing them giving him their line or supporting him. I think I would have a hard time seeing that happen. So I think he's going to run in the primary or try to run in the primary and see what happens. I don't think he's going to do particularly well. I'm actually not that worried about Eric Adams winning the primary. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that'll be an issue. I think it's really going to come down to Andrew Cuomo and everybody else in the
Yes.
field. So we'll see what happens, but I feel fairly confident that we're probably going to have Sliwa again as the Republican nominee, which, you know, I'm not a fan of his, but I feel like, if there was somebody I'd want on the ballot against a Democrat, it would probably be him. So
Oh
we'll
yeah,
see what happens there.
with this red beret. It was like right at my
Yes.
doorstep last week for the parade. It was, interesting. Uh,
Yeah.
oh God. Yeah. This is we're in such a dark timeline.
I've said that a lot, right? It's like the darkest timeline, unfortunately.
I feel like I fell asleep in 2020 and then woke up and 5 minutes later it's still 2020. Donald Trump is president and
Yeah.
looming back into public life. Like it's just sort of it's so cruel. It's just so
Yeah, I
it's
know.
but thank you, Kim, for coming on. It was such a pleasure to have you and to see you, and we'll definitely catch up over some beverages.
Definitely. No, this was great. Thank you so much for having me on. It was a lot of fun, and it is a dark timeline, but there are little rays of hope. I see it all over as I talk to people, And you are a ray of hope in all of this as well. And so, hopefully we will all come together and continue to do good things for the city.
Don't rank Eric or Andrew.
Don't rank Eric or Andrew. Exactly.
And this is the Left in the Forgotten Borough podcast. We'll see you later this week with Nancy.